One of the sad things about the term theory is that how a scientist uses it is almost the polar opposite of how it's used in everyday language. So if you're on social media and you're seeing what somebody's writing and then you say, well, that's your theory, what you're really saying is that's your guess, that's your conjecture. In science, a theory is something else. A theory is an explanatory framework that has withstood a large amount of experimentation. It's something that you can use to make hypotheses about the natural world. A hypothesis is sort of an informed guess about the way things are. And those hypotheses can be used to make predictions that you can then test. So, in colloquial usage, as we said, theory just means something closer to a guess or conjecture. But only a theory is actually quite a compliment from a scientific viewpoint. Theories are broad explanatory frameworks that make sense of the facts that we see scientifically. They explain why the facts are the way they are, and they're constantly being refined and tested. Despite what you may have been told as a Christian, evolution is a theory in the scientific sense. So evolution is a well-tested explanatory framework. It's supported by a large body of experimental evidence. We've had over 150 years of evolution as a productive scientific theory. It makes highly accurate predictions, and we have not yet been able to falsify it through experimentation. One of the things that I talk about in the book at more length is that a scientific theory is never accepted as proven by scientists. It's always held as provisional, at least in some sense. Some scientific theories are so extremely well supported that it's very unlikely that new evidence will shift our views. But scientists never accept a hypothesis. They only fail to reject a hypothesis, and it's an important distinction. So we've had evolution as a hypothesis for 150 years, and we have not yet rejected that hypothesis as we've learned more about the natural order. Evolution is also the most foundational theory in biology. This is a famous quote from a Orthodox Christian population geneticist, where he says, nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution. I sometimes tell my students at Trinity, if you ask the question why often enough in biology, eventually you have to give recourse to some sort of evolutionary explanation. So what we see is multiple converging lines of evidence from different areas of science, embryology, genetics, the fossil record, and as scientists, we fail to reject that hypothesis. Now, does that mean that we might not find new information in the future that might cause us to reconsider our ideas? Yes, possibly. Scientists always hold things provisionally. But whatever we find in the future also has to fit with the lines of evidence that we already have, and those lines of evidence are quite compelling. Here's an example of what one biologist says about evolution. He says, I hope this doesn't turn into a rant, but it might. You've been warned. Hopefully you can read this. He says, evolution is not a theory in crisis. It's not teetering on the verge of collapse. It has not failed as a scientific explanation. There's evidence for evolution, gobs and gobs of it, and so on. He says it's a productive framework for lots of biological research. It has amazing explanatory power. There is no conspiracy to hide the truth about the failure of evolution. There has really been no failure of evolution as a scientific theory. It works, and it works well. I say these things not because I'm crazy or because I've converted to evolution. It might surprise you that this is actually a young Earth creationist biologist who is saying this. This is actually somebody who doesn't think evolution is actually theologically correct. But he's honest to say the evidence is strong. He says, I say these things because they are true. And then he goes on to say, I'm motivated this morning because I've read someone else who's going on this rant that evolution is a failure. This individual is named Todd Wood. He's a fascinating individual. He's a young Earth creationist, but he recognizes that the strength of the evidence for evolution is extremely strong. He actually thinks that the way to solve that problem is to do better research from a young Earth perspective that rejects evolution, but doesn't try to just simply muddy the waters by denying the evidence for evolution in the process. So he's a very interesting individual. He gets a lot of flack from the creationist community.